Welcome back. My name is Laura Watson, and in this lesson, I am going to be diving into my nature journal with you again, and I'm going to be painting a white fawn lily. And this is also known as the Oregon fawn lily, and the Latin name is Erythronium organum. And I'm going to show you how to use waterproof ink and watercolor to create a very quick and approachable botanical painting. If you would like to learn how, then keep on watching. I started off by drawing a circle on the other side of my page where I'm going to finish my nature journal study using a compass, and I just used one out of an inexpensive geometry kit that I got at Staples. And now I am just roughing in the lines that will map out the position of the center of the flower and the petals. And this is what I call making a stick drawing. I have a lesson in one of my classes, Watercolor Botanicals for Beginners, in the watercolor garden that goes into detail about this, but you basically just map out your drawing with simple shapes and lines. This helps you get the position and the angles of things correct first before starting to add in your actual outlines and details. And I try to just lightly map in the lines of my drawing without doing any erasing, because I want to see where I place the line, and if I don't like it, I'll move the line and then I'll pick the one that looks the best. So I'm using really light pressure and just sort of sketching in the shapes of the petals right now. And as I said, I'm not going to do much erasing at all until I'm happy with my drawing. Then I'll take my kneaded eraser and I'll just keep the lines that I like the best. Once I'm a little happier with my lines, I'll start going over them a little bit harder in pencil, and this is because I'm going to end up going over this final drawing with waterproof ink. So if my pencil lines don't completely erase, I'm okay with that because it'll be covered up with the ink. Now I'm adding in the anthers, which are on an angle, so there's a lot of foreshortening at play here, so you won't be able to see some of the filaments at all, wherein then some are on a bit of an angle. There's also on this photo, my reference photo, the flower is facing upwards, which is not very common for fawn lilies, but it's also unique because you can see the beautiful orange and red markings in the center of the flower. So I'm making sure that I draw those in as well. And then I've just added in the little bit of the stem that you can see. Now I'm taking my 0.8 waterproof pen, and you can see I make a little bit of a mistake here because I didn't turn my book. If I wasn't filming, I would turn the page so the angle's easier. But again, this is our nature journal and perfection is not our goal. Now I'm using my finest tip pen to actually ink the drawing, and I use a thicker pen for my borders and shapes because it actually makes my ink pen on my plants look even smaller, so it's a bit of a visual effect that I'm going for. And the pen that I'm using for the plants is a 0.05 or I believe 20 millimeters, so it's the smallest nib you can get in the Staedtler or Secura Micron brand. And it depends on what I'm painting. I do add a bit of veining and contour lines, usually with my smaller pen. So I'm just sort of making some assessments here, and I've decided besides the central vein going down the middle of the petals, I'm also just going to add a few little contour marks at the base of the petals as well. And now for the very fun part, which is erasing all of the pencil and just leaving you with your ink line drawing so you're ready to paint. I decided to leave the central markings that are going to be red and orange in pencil, and then I just erased them because they're pretty easy to paint in. I didn't want to add ink to them because I want to keep that sort of lightness to them. So I'm taking my page right out of my nature journal now because I'm going to start painting, and it's just easier for me because I'm left-handed and I can turn my paper. And that's another reason I really like using a nature journal with removable pages. If you've watched my country diary series, then you know that I had a spiral bound nature journal. I actually ended up taking it apart just because it got pretty challenging for me as it got stacked up thicker to paint on the smaller pages. And again, maybe it's easier if you're right-handed, but I like really hook my hand around and it just becomes awkward. So I already had some colors mixed up for painting fawn lilies, and I'm just remixing some, and I'm using combinations of sap green and undersea green, and also some botanical gray for the flower color, which is my mix of French ultramarine and light red, and then I added a little bit of moon glow. And these classes are also available on my website, the Watercolor Garden. It's where I have an online community, and I don't even know how many classes, quite a lot, and I go into a lot of detail about the colors and color mixing. So if I'm going fast and this is something that you really want to learn more about, then I invite you to check out the link in the video description and check out the Watercolor Garden, because it is an amazing place to learn. We have a really supportive community there as well. So you can see I'm just sort of pondering through my colors right now. And I also mixed up a purpley brown color with permanent violet and light red and a bit of neutral tint. So now I have my colors for the stem as well as the flower, and I didn't really need to mix up the green again because I'd already painted my leaves on my other page. So you can see I'm just using the other side of my palette to mix up some yellow for the anthers and then some red orange colors for those central markings. And I'm using Scarlet Lake and Crimson Lake as well as New Gamboge. And most of the brands I use for my paints are Artist Quality by Holbein and Daniel Smith. Maybe a little more Holbein, but kind of an even split of colors. But you can use whatever colors you have, honestly. The best way to copy an artist when you don't have the exact same colors for the tutorial is to try and just use something that is, in botanical painting, transparent, and then matching the warm and cool tones of the colors. So what I'm doing right now is using my number 2 brush to wet my petals first. I often start with wet on dry for my botanical paintings, but I am starting with wet into wet because I want to start off with making those beautiful markings around the center of the flower, and I need that sort of soft blended out look to create those initial markings. I decided to wet all the petals first because, as you can see here, the color or the paper is a little too wet and the color spread out a little too far. So what I did to compensate for that is I mixed up my paint a little bit thicker, and that way I could just start painting with my paper as wet as it was, but I made my paint drier with less water, basically a thicker mix. And now the water is settling into the paper, and I continue making those markings, and now it's spreading out at a sort of a speed and a distance that I like. I'm using my 00 brush, and I first added in the yellow, and now I'm adding in the red crimson mix just below, and just using tiny little stippling movements because the paper's drying as I paint. I am choosing the color first that spread out more, the yellow, and then the one that needs to be less spread out, the red, and that works out with my paper drying time. I'm going to let that dry, and while it is drying, I'm just adding in the warm yellow to my anthers. And I realize as I'm painting here that I forgot to ink in one of the little filaments where I'm painting right now, so I just painted in with the color, and then once everything is completely dry, I'll go back with my smallest nib pen and add the ink around the edges of the filament. what I'm doing right now is taking my Botanical Gray with my 00 brush, and I'm just taking a little line and pulling it down from the center of each petal into the center of the flower. And I'm just doing this in watercolor because I don't want it to be too obvious, and I want it to just start creating some contour and depth in the center of the flower. Now I am jumping right into painting the petals, and I'm leaving lots of white paper showing because it is a white flower, so I'm really just indicating in some areas the shading and shadowing with this beautiful neutral gray color. And I have a warm and a cool version mixed up. The warm version having more moon glow, the cool version having more French ultramarine. This is a great way to paint white flowers, by having a warm and cool gray. Not every gray is going to work for white flowers, which is why I use my Botanical Gray mix so that it doesn't look dark or dull or sort of dirty or too opaque. And the way I do this is by painting wet on dry with small areas. I add a little bit of paint, then I rinse and dab my brush and I blend it out. And I'm just going to continue on going around all the petals, adding enough shading and contrast to start to bring my flower to life. Now what I'm doing here is picking up more of my crimson and scarlet mix and the warm yellow mix, and I'm starting to do a little bit of dry brushing, which is sort of step 2 of my 3-step painting method. And I'm lightly streaking through some fine little lines, first of the scarlet mix, into my center markings, because you'll find if you just do one layer of wet and wet, it gives you that nice soft look, but it's not usually defined enough. And so just by adding a few little dry markings, you can create more definition of color without losing the effect of that beautiful sort of soft aura of the central marking. So you can see with really light pressure, I'm just going through and adding the crimson, and now I'm going to add in some of the yellow as well. I'm just bringing the yellow out with a little bit more of a wet wash up into the center contour line of each petal. And because I'm painting that wet on dry, it's diffusing less and adding a little bit more concentrated color. And then I'm taking those darker, warmer yellow colors and again doing the same effect with a little bit of dry brushing and markings. I'm just adding that in, and you're going to see that it really helps the center become more defined without being over painted. The next thing I'm going to do is also part of step 2 of my painting process, and I'm taking my Botanical Gray, and what I'm doing is adding a little bit more veining to my petals. And I'm doing this again with my 00 brush. You can use any brush that has a nice fine point, and I'm just lightly streaking up a little bit of the Botanical Gray in certain areas of the petal, and this again is just going to give it a little bit more contour and depth and create some more realism without over painting it. I don't want to add more wet on dry washes because I'll start to overpaint it and my flower will start to look more gray than white. Now I'm going back with my fine tip waterproof pen, and I added in that little filament that I missed, and then just the tiniest little bit of ink at the base of the filaments to anchor the center of the flower. Now I'm going to paint the stem using my violet and light red mix, and I am just adding more darker color at the top of the stem where it meets the flower and down the far side. This is to give it, again, more depth and dimension by having light and dark areas. Now I've pretty much finished my flower, and I always add in a little bit of a faded out background in my nature journal to make my botanical illustrations pop and just add a little bit of an anchor to them. And I start off with wet into wet, and I do this in sections because this is like a star-shaped flower. I'm just going to treat each area between the petals as a section. So I'm using a bit of a bigger brush. I think this is a number 4. Some people are comfortable with a 6, which is fine, but I prefer smaller brushes. And I am just dropping in the color closest to the petal, and then I am rinsing my brush and just sort of stippling out the color so that I'm not painting right to the edge of the circle. I want this to sort of be a faded out vignette look. And so I'm going to do that on each section. And if you're still watching, I want to thank you for making it this far. I don't usually post full tutorials on my YouTube channel. This is posted ad-free in the Watercolor Garden, so you can watch it ad-free along with other classes and tip videos. So what I've been doing lately, or what I want to start doing, is just posting a few more sort of mini lessons on YouTube to share them with everybody. And I think it helps people that just want to get started right away, and it also lets people know that I do have a lot more learning content, and you can get to know my teaching style before checking out the Watercolor Garden if that's something you want to do. And right now I am adding the color into the bottom of the lily, and I usually like to make the color at the bottom of my backgrounds a little bit darker so it anchors them better. So I'm going to go back after that dries and add a little more color because I'm running out of my background color right now, and I'm going to need to remix it soon. That's another key thing for learning about watercolors, is to know when you need to mix up more paint. Otherwise, you'll have to paint more layers and your painting will look overworked. Another thing I wanted to share is that at the beginning of filming this and creating this little painting, had my doubts that I was going to actually end up sharing this with my students and on YouTube. And that's, oh, just a minute. I added way too much dark red. Can you see how I am just scooping it up with my brush and then adding the color? If you do that, you can scoop it up and rinse your brush and then correct your color. Anyway, now I have more background color mixed up. But I just wanted to share that I felt really self-conscious about painting this flower and sharing it because, one, I made that mistake on the top of the circle, which is annoying. I don't usually do that. But I'm trying to overcome my own perfectionism, and so I do end up sharing this video. And then the other reason is that this flower is facing upwards, and it just looked a little bit different than the rest of the fawn lilies I've been painting. But I really just had to have faith and continue with my 3-step method to watch this come together. And by the end, I was more confident with feeling like, oh yeah, my painting actually turned out again. And that's why I created the 3-step method, because there's so much unknown and doubt sometimes as you're creating a painting in the beginning stages. I wanted a system to follow that I knew created results that I was happy with every time. And my students tell me the same thing after they learn this. And so it's a really great way to approach your paintings, whether it's more formal botanical painting or just in your nature journal. So here I am just re-wetting that bottom area and adding a bit more of the more concentrated paint now. And that brings us to the end of this mini lesson. I hope you enjoyed the project and decide to paint along with me. And please leave a comment below if you found this helpful, and if you did, what part of this video was the most helpful for you. I'd love your feedback because it helps me make more videos that are even better in the future. So here's the full nature journal spread that I created. You can see this one's still drying. I have my other paintings. I didn't actually film those, but I look forward to sharing another project with you soon. I hope you enjoyed this quick lesson on how to paint a fawn lily. If you would like to see more on how to paint like this, other wildflower projects, and even a pink fawn lily, then check out the Watercolor Garden, which is my online learning community. The link is in the description below, and you can get access to many, 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 many classes that I have filmed over the years that are full length, step by step, and ad free. I'd love to see you there. And if you're not quite ready to commit to paid online learning, then also check out my free class on how to paint a wild rose. This is completely free to join and it is a step-by-step real-time lesson that takes about an hour to complete. And the link to sign up for that is also below in the video description. I hope you have a wonderful day and that this video inspired you to create.